Hi there, and welcome to the Explaining History podcast. And in this episode, we're going to rethink a little bit the famous Solzhenitsyn book, The Gulag Archipelago, and see if we can come up with some new interpretations on the idea of the Gulag system within the Soviet Union, because there is a raft of modern writing on the subject which looks at it from a variety of different perspectives. The Second World War, Solzhenitsyn in February 1945, whilst in East Prussia, was arrested by the Soviet secret police for making a comment about Stalin and his conduct of the war in a letter to a friend. He was accused of anti-Soviet propaganda under Article 58 of the Soviet Criminal Code and given a lengthy jail sentence. He was taken to the Lubyanka prison where he was interrogated, and after being sentenced in absentia, he was given an 8-year jail sentence in a Soviet labor camp. Following Khrushchev's secret speech in 1956, Solzhenitsyn was freed, he was exonerated and returned home, and in 1960, with the express permission of Khrushchev, his first book, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, an account of life in the Gulag, was picked up by Novy Mir magazine, and then 2 years later in 1962, again with Khrushchev's blessing, was published. It was read in schools. Khrushchev, when he was questioned on this, said there was a Stalinist in all of us and this evil must be rooted out. And it was part of Khrushchev's wider policy to differentiate himself from Stalin and to present a different view of the Soviet Union. The thaw, which began in 1956, ultimately brought about a degree of chaos that the party old guard didn't like, and it was one of the reasons for Khrushchev's downfall in 1965. By the time the Gulag Archipelago had been published in 1973, the Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich had done its work. It was an enormously important work of fiction that, obviously a fiction based on realities, that had sent shockwaves around the world and had a significant role to play in discrediting the last aspects of the Soviet Union, which had been lauded by the foreign fellow traveller movement throughout the 1930s to the 1950s, and anything possibly progressive about the Soviet Union Hi there, and welcome to the Explaining History podcast. Transpires after reading Denisovich to not be there. We're going to rethink the Gulag Archipelago was a history of the camps and the Gulag Archipelago. Its various sections can trace some new interpretation of the system on the idea of the Gulag system within the Soviet Union, because there is a raft of modern writing on the subject of incarceration from a variety of different perspectives, troublemakers, and looks at the development of the system in February 1945, whilst in East Prussia was arrested by the Soviet secret police for making a comment about Stalin. The notion itself of it being an archipelago letter is slightly outdated based on what we now understand. So if we were to consider the analogy for one moment, and the camps are dotted like small islands across the Soviet interrogated, but when an individual wound up in absentia camp, it was given an 8-year jail sentence. They were not quite as hermetically sealed from the rest of the Soviet following Khrushchev's secret speech in 1956. They were not essentially stuck freed, he was exonerated and The publication, homeland in
of
1960, with the express permission of damning Khrushchev
of the Soviet regime,
his first
and
created
Day
this
in the Life
mental
of
map
Ivan Denisovich,
that has really
an account
dominated
of life
most
in
of
the
the
Gulags,
scholarly
was
and
picked up by
popular works on
Novimir
the subject
magazine,
ever
then
since. If you
2 years
imagine
later in
that
62,
the secrecy
was published
surrounding
in
the
various
Soviet
schools,
camps,
Khrushchev,
their
when he was
separateness,
questioned on this, there was
and their
a Stalinist in all of us,
geographical
and
and
this evil
physical
must be rooted out.
remoteness from
And
anything.
it was part
that
of Khrushchev's
people,
wider
not
policy
just
to
in the West, but
differentiate
even
himself
in
from Stalin,
Russia, were
able
able
to
present
physically deal
a
with
different view,
and
of the compare
Soviet
that
Union.
to the other system
thought
that was far more
which,
accessible
began
to
in 1956,
people in the post-war era.
the
Ultimately,
Nazi system of camps
brought about a degree of chaos.
defeat of
The
Nazi
party
were
largely
there
like
open. It was on
display,
for
Khrushchev's
most of the
downfall
secrets
in
surrounding
1965
swept
by the
away.
time the Gulag
It
Archipelago
did
had
encourage
been published
people
to
1973
embrace this idea
the
of the
Day in the Life of Ivan
archipelago,
Denisovich
had
the
done
notion that it
its
was a
work.
closed system
It was
that wasn't discussed in
enormously
wider Soviet
important
society. Work of fiction
once
that an individual was stuck into it,
fiction based on
they devoured
realities
never
that
seen
again
shockwaves around
our
the
mental
world.
map
For
the Gulags was essentially
significant role
the
to
camps
play
of
in
discrediting
Nazis,
because
so
little was known about
aspects
of
of the Soviet Union
that there was only one
equivalent, and it was
foreign
taken as
fellow
read
traveller
that the Nazi
movement
camps and the Soviet
throughout
camps
the
must be rather
1930s
similar
to the
well,
1950s.
actually not.
Now, I've been reading an
possibly
article
about the
in
Soviet
the
Union,
2015 summer
that
edition
people
of Critic,
mistakenly
by
latched
the
onto
academic
thought
David
really
Shearer
was solid
on
and
the
coherent.
Soviet Gulag
It
system.
certainly transpires
Soviet
after reading
Gulag
Denisovich
and
not to be
Archipelago.
that.
So what I'm getting
The
here
Gulag
is drawn
Archipelago
from
was
a history of the
this
camps.
writing.
And
what David Shearer
its
has
various sections
done
it traces
is
the
done a
development of the system
review
from
of
1918
a
to
number of different
1956,
writers on the
looking at
subject
the
of the Gulag
original
orders
of
of
Lenin
I've got
to
the time
set up
in this
a
podcast
system
to go
of
through everything that's said
incarceration
for political
on the
prisoners,
topic of the
troublemakers,
revision to
and looks
the
at
notion
the development
of
of
the
the
system
archipelago.
but I'm
About
going to try and give you some of
Stalin.
the highlights because
And
it is
for
really
the time
important.
it's a really
And the way in which we think
book,
about the camps
but
is
there are now
constantly
revisionist
evolving,
ideas which suggest
emerging
that
because new evidence
the
is
notion
coming to light.
itself of it being an archipelago
So
is
instead of the camps
slightly
being an
outdated based
archipelago,
on what we
new
now
metaphors
understand.
are being
So if we
coined.
were to consider the analogy
To
for one
talk
moment,
about the very fluid and
the
dynamic
camps
relationship between the
are
camps and the rest
dotted
of
like
Soviet
small
society.
islands
So
across the
the
Soviet
revolving
Union,
door or the
but
porous
when
boundary
an individual
is a much
wound
more
up in a
accurate
camp,
way of looking at the camp.
they were
Prisoners
not quite as hermetically sealed
there
from
was
the
quite
rest of
possible
the
to have
Soviet
several
Union,
sentences
as it
in the
might
camps,
first
where
appear.
one might
They
to
were not
have
essentially
a
stuck
5-year
on
spell.
an island.
18
The
months
publication
outside the camps, then rearrest
of
and
the
the
Gulag
incarceration
for
offered a
the 7
damning
years and
indictment of the
perhaps have
Soviet
another
regime
5 years
and
sentence
created
on
this
top of
mental
that.
map.
One of the
that has really
absurdities of
dominated
Stalinism
most
was
of the
pointed out by
scholarly
Jean
and
Foucault,
popular works
the
on the subject
historian and
ever
philosopher
since.
of
If you
ideas,
imagine
who
that
spent a lot of
the
time thinking
secrecy
about the
surrounding
development
the
of prisons and
Soviet camps
incarceration,
and their
and
separateness,
Foucault pointed out that there was a
and
kind of
their
absurdity
geographical
about a
physical
workers' state
remoteness
that
from
used
anything,
labour both to define
that
citizenship,
people, not
i.e.
just in the West, but even
what kind
in
of
Russia,
how valid a
were
kind of
able
citizen you
physically
were,
deal
dependent
with.
on the kind of
And
work you actually did.
compare that to
And also
the
a
other
form of
system
punishment
that was far more
and
accessible
there was a
to
blatant
people in
contradiction
the post-war
between the
era.
goals and reality
The
of Soviet
Nazi system
penal
practice,
camps, which followed the
i.e.
defeat of
that,
Nazi Germany,
there was
largely
supposedly
there
a
and
redemptive
open
purpose
of
of
labour,
labour,
i.e. that labour had a
most of the secrets
transformative
surrounding
quality
had been
and
that
that swept away
a bad
it
kind of
did
individual could be put
encourage
into the camp
people
system
to
at one end,
embrace
and
this
through the
idea
application
of
of
the
hard physical
archipelago,
labour,
a
of the
redeemed
notion that it was a
proletarian
closed system
soul could emerge
that wasn't
at the other
discussed
end.
in wider
However, the
Soviet
reality,
society,
of course, in this
and
redemptive
once
labour,
an individual
often
was stuck into
large
it,
numbers
they
of the
devoured
people
and
that it was
applied to
again,
our mental
different
map
way of looking
for
at
the Gulags
labour
was essentially
in the camps.
the camps of
Actually,
the
far more
Nazis,
Marxist
because
one.
so little was known
The
about the
Marxist
Gulags,
idea of profit
that
is
there
that
was
profit
only
comes
one
from surplus
other
labour
equivalent,
value,
and it was,
i.e. if somebody
taken as read that the
produces
Nazi
£10
camps and the
or
Soviet camps
$10
must
of
be
value
similar.
through their
actually
labour
not.
in an hour.
Now, I've been
by simply
reading
paying
an
them
article
$5
in the
or
2015
£5,
summer
you
edition
walk away
of Critica
with $5
magazine
worth
by
of
the
worth
academic
of
D.
profit.
Shearer.
Well, the
on
Soviet system
the Soviet
did that
Gulag system
on a
Soviet
vast
Gulag
scale
and
and it was a
archipelago.
vast
So what I'm getting
system
here
for
is
extracting
drawn
labour
from,
value
from
this
workers
writing
by
and
paying
what
them,
David
by
Shearer
slaving them,
has done
paying them
is
nothing,
done
half
a
starving
literature
and simply
review
sucking the labour
of
value
a
quite
number
literally
of
out of
different
their
writers
bodies.
on the
I
subject
suppose it's
of
the
rather
Gulags
fitting
now,
in
a perverse and monstrous way
in this
that
podcast
dictators
to everything
like
said
Lenin
on
and
the
Stalin
topic of the
steeped
revision
in
Marxist theory
the
and
notion
detailed
of the Gulag
understanding of
archipelago.
Marxist
I'm going to try and give you some of the
applying
highlights, 'cause it
these
is
notions
really
in
important.
the most brutal
And
way
the way in which
possible
we think about
is
the
worth
camps
saying here
is
that this
constantly
is probably not what Karl Marx had
evolving
intended
and emerging.
The
as new
camps were
evidence
captured
comes
for the
light.
first time in 1934
So instead
by
of the camps
a
being
group
an
of writers
archipelago,
and artists
new
led
metaphors are
by
being
Maxim
coined,
Gorky, who by
to
this
talk
time
about the
had
very
really
fluid
sold
and dynamic
himself
relationship between the camps
to
and
the
the rest of Soviet
Bolsheviks
society.
and become their
So
laureates.
the revolving door,
The
or the
photographer
porous
Alexander
boundary,
Rodchenko
is a much more
created
way of looking at the
along
camp.
with
Prisoners
Gorky
it's
the
quite
notion of
possible to have several
Pedakovka,
sentences
the idea
in the
of a
camps,
myth of
where one
reforging,
might
to have a
what I just talked about there,
redemption
spell,
through labour.
18 months
and
outside the camps,
they
then
claimed that
rearrest and
Pedakovka was the
reincarceration
basis
for
of the
Soviet
Soviet
labour
labour
camp
camp
system.
have another
They
5-year
wrote
sentence
a
on top
what
of
the
that.
equivalent of a
One
the
of
Soviet
the
equivalent of a
absurdities
coffee
of
table book.
Stalinism
The
was
Stalin
pointed out by
White
Michel
Sea,
Foucault,
Baltic
the
Sea
historian
Canal,
and philosopher
the
of
ideas,
ideas, who spent a lot of time thinking about the development
police
of
officials,
prisons and
such as
incarceration.
Yagoda,
And
the head of the
Foucault pointed out
NKVD,
that there was a
were
kind of an
treated
absurdity
as kinds of
about
heroes.
a workers'
Their
state.
heroism
labour
was
both
based
to
around the
define
idea that they had
citizenship,
become
kind of engineers of the human condition,
how valid a kind of citizen
they
you
were
dependent on the
reforming
kind of work
men
you
and
actually
women
did.
through their labour
And also a
rescuing
form
them
of punishment
from
that
bad
pre-revolutionary behaviours
that
between the
in
goals
their
and
eyes
reality
had
of Soviet
learned
practice,
through the kind of the
i.e.
wicked
that,
and iniquitous world
there was
of
supposedly
capitalism.
a redemptive
And
purpose
there were
of
Soviet
labour,
officials
i.e.
that
that
Labour
believed
had
that
there were Soviet
transformative
officials
quality,
and probably indeed
that
camp guards
a
that
bad
on some
kind of
level
individual
believed
could be
that
put into
they
the
were
camp system
trying
at
to
one end,
redeem
and
individuals
through the application
However,
of hard physical
the
labour,
system
a
itself
redeemed
was not
proletarian
designed
soul
with this
could
in
emerge
mind.
at
If
the
it
other
happened
end.
to be
However, the reality,
a
of course,
byproduct
the
of
redemptive
the
labour
Soviet system,
often killed
then fine.
large
But
numbers
it
of
was
the
not
people
designed
that it was
with this
applied
goal
to.
at its heart. Instead,
A different
it
way
was
of
designed,
looking
as mentioned,
at
as a vast
labour
sort of
in the camps.
labour
Actually,
extraction
kind
system.
of a far more Marxist
The
one.
pioneer of this
The
system,
Marxist
its father
idea of
really,
profit
was
is
Naftali
that
Frankel.
profit comes from surplus
Naftali
labour
Frankel,
value,
i.e. if somebody
Alexander
produces
Solzhenitsyn
was
was
$10
a
of
Turkish
value
Jew from
through
Constantinople,
labour,
in an
who
hour
seemed to
by
have
simply
been
paying them
caught up in the
£5
revolution
you
somewhere,
walk away with $5
and wound up as a prisoner in the
profit.
Sovietsky Islands.
Well, the Soviet system did that
He was
on a
arrested in
vast scale.
1922
It
for
was a
illegally
vast
crossing borders.
system for
Nobody knows quite what that means.
labour
He could have been a
value
smuggler
from
or
workers
some kind
by
of merchant,
paying them, by
and
enslaving
given
them,
a 10-year sentence
paying
in
them
half
nothing,
of hard
half
labour
starving them,
in the
and
Sovietsky
simply
Islands,
sucking
White
the
Sea,
labour value quite
which
literally
becomes
out of their
the
bodies.
first camp system.
I suppose
of
it's
the
rather
Gulag.
fitting
It
in
was
a
the
perverse and monstrous way
system that all
that
of the Gulags
dictators
were roughly based around.
like Lenin and
He
Stalin
became
steeped
he rose
in
quickly from being a
Marxist
prisoner to being
theory
a
and
staff
a
member
detailed
on the
understanding of
strength,
Marxist
basically in his
economics,
proposal,
applying
that
these notions
the
in the most brutal
camp
way
administration
possible.
is
I think
worth
in
saying
these
here that
food
this is probably
rations
not what
to
Karl
their
Marx
rate
had
of production
intended.
something.
The camps were captured for the first time in 1934 by a group of writers and artists led by Maxim Gorky, who by this time had really sold himself to the Bolsheviks and become their laureates. The photographer Alexander Rodchenko created, along with
the
Gorky,
Solovetsky Islands,
the notion of Pedakovka, the idea of a myth of reforging, what I just talked about there, redemption through labour.
Camp was
and they claimed that Pedakovka was the basis of the Soviet labour camp system. They wrote a
skilled capitalist,
the equivalent of the Soviet equivalent of a coffee table book,
existed there,
the Stalin, White Sea, Baltic Sea Canal, the Bielomor Canal,
revenue for the state,
in which police officials, such as Yagoda, head of the NKVD, were treated as kinds of heroes. Their heroism was based around the idea that they had become kind of engineers of the human condition.
How much of this
they were reforming men and women through their labour and rescuing them
emerged as
from
one of the
bad
camp's
pre-revolutionary behaviours.
Solzhenitsyn
in their eyes had been learned through the wicked and iniquitous world
which resulted in the
capitalism,
weaker prisoners,
and there were Soviet officials
very
that
quickly.
believed in this. There were Soviet officials and probably indeed camp
who were
guards
able to,
on some level, believed that they were trying to redeem individuals. However, the system itself was not designed.
Even if Frankel did not invent every aspect,
if it happened to be a byproduct of
apparently profitable
economic
institution,
then fine.
And
but
he did so
it was not
at the
designed
time,
with
in a
this
place and in a
goal
manner which
at
may
its
well
heart.
brought the idea.
Instead, it was designed, as mentioned, as the historian Golfo labour
argues
extraction
that there is
system.
no redemptive
The
quality
pioneer
to
of
the
the
Soviet
Soviet
camp
father,
system,
really,
and
was
that,
Naftali
as
Frenkel.
Solzhenitsyn has argued,
Naftali Frenkel,
it was its primary role.
Alexander
was the destruction of
Solzhenitsyn believed
individuals.
it was the exploitation of
Constantinople,
by bringing every ounce of work from them,
caught up in the
revolution.
reason why there were
wound up
frequent
as a prisoner in the
amnesties,
Solovetsky Islands.
frequent
He
releases
was
of thousands of
arrested in 1923 for illegally crossing borders.
No longer
Nobody knows quite what that means. He could have been a smuggler or some kind of merchant, and given a 10-year sentence of hard labour in the Solovetsky Islands and the White Sea,
important to get
which
these
becomes
net consumers
the first
of
camp
resources
system of the
off
Gulag.
the
It was
balance
the
sheet of the camp
system
as
that
quickly
all
as
of the
possible,
Gulags were
dump
roughly
them back
based
into
around.
society where they can
He became
wither away
he rose
and
quickly
die,
from being a prisoner to being a
or
staff
not,
member
who
on the
cares,
strength basically of his
and
proposal
get in
that
fresh
the
labour as quickly
camp
as
administration link
the camp
inmates'
system
food rations
operates
to their rate of
more like
production,
a kind of
something
Dickensian
that was rolled out through
far
all
worse
camps
than anything that the work
throughout
councils
the
ever came up
Gulag
with.
system
And
until really the
it
1950s.
paradoxically,
The
for
what
socialist
Frankel managed to do to pull strings
organ of a
and give himself this kind of advantage. No one really knows, and the story of Frankel is lost in a lot of mythology. But supposedly, when he arrived in the Solovetsky Islands,
capitalist world,
how
it really
much
is
waste
the
was engendered,
absolute
how
epitome
much
of
potential
labour value
revenue
extraction.
the island
Labour is
was
only
moving
extracted
out on,
at a
losing out
higher rate
he was
in
able
the
to
death camps
show
of the
manner
Nazi
of
regime that
and,
double up as
skilled
labour camps as well,
capitalist,
specifically Auschwitz,
that
Birkenau,
the industries that existed there,
a
which were
lifespan
forestry, farming,
of
and
3
brickmaking,
months, and
could
this is
be made
because
so much better
the camp
and
has a
generate
purpose.
badly needed
The
revenue
Nazi
for the
camps have the
state.
purpose of
Yagoda,
systems of labour extraction, but
came to see
also
him
of
and
factories of
suddenly,
genocide as well.
realised that he was onto
the prisoners
something.
were Jewish,
Supposedly,
earmarked for
Frankel actually was
annihilation
taken to
anyway
Moscow
as
to
quickly
speak
as
with
possible.
Stalin
Meant that if some
and
labour could be
Gulags.
extracted from them in the meantime,
how much
this
of
was
this
a good
again is
thing,
myth
but
making?
the genocidal
to
element
know.
was the real
But
end
Frankel
game.
emerged as one of
In
the camp's commanders.
1934,
major changes happened to the police state. Created it's reorganised from being simply a political police force, searching out class enemies and protecting very quickly the revolution, into providing security for the state itself.
Work hard.
This was now the institutions that controlled the Gulag and they were no longer there to
did not
fight for
invent every
revolution,
aspect of the system.
but
He did find
to
a way to turn a
protect
prison camp
institutions
into
that were now
apparently profitable
established.
economic
And this
institution.
sees, after
did so
1934,
at a time, in a place,
a significant decline in the supposed redemptive quality of
the
the
historian
camps.
Golfo
Instead,
Alexopoulos
the
argues
camps are
that there is
simply
no
seen as
redemptive quality
places
to
for the Soviet camp
destruction
system of enemies,
and that,
or the
as Solzhenitsyn has argued,
utilisation of the
it
labour
was
of
its
enemies.
primary
Because it
role
was
the destruction of
decided
individuals.
after 1934
It was the exploitation of human beings
no longer possible,
by wringing every ounce
that
of work
rehabilitation
from
was no longer
and
desirable, and
the
simply society needed to be
reason
protected
why
from bad
there
elements.
were
That
frequent
the bad elements,
amnesties
such as Gulags, when
and
their
frequent
sentences were finished,
releases of
were
thousands
told
of prisoners
that they would not be
were
allowed to
these
go
were the
home
prisoners that were no
to
longer in use.
the communities that they had come from.
Weakened
Instead,
or
that they
dying,
now
and
had
they
to be
had no
moved
labour
to
left
special
within them.
areas,
Physical
so
strength
that
left
when they
within them
were
to contribute.
allowed out of the Gulags,
So it's
being
important
sent
to
off
get
to
these net consumers
special
of
areas
resources
meant
off
that they
the
existed in it almost like a
balance sheet
parallel
of the camp as quickly as
system.
possible,
And
dump
it's
them
the
back
transition
into society
between
where
the
they
special
can
areas or special
wither
settlements as
away
they're known,
and die,
and
or
the
not,
cities
who
that
cares,
the former inmates
and
are
get in
allowed
fresh
into.
labour as
And
quickly
sometimes
as
the
possible.
shift of reincarceration
camp
back
system
into the camp
operates
system
more like a
that
Dickensian
creates this
workhouse, far worse, in
semi-permeable
fact, than
membrane
anything
between
that
the
workhouses ever
camps
came
and
up
the
with.
wider world.
And
it was difficult to actually
paradoxically,
step back into
for
normal
a
life really
socialist
until the
institution
Khrushchev
of
thaw
an
of the
an organ of a
1950s.
notionally socialist
But
state,
there was
more
a kind of
ruthless system
grey
of
zone
labour
between the camps
exploitation
and the rest of Russian
not possibly
society
have been dreamt
that
of,
former inmates
even in
were
the kind of
able to
exploiting
exist in.
capitalist
It
world.
was
It
not
really
a
is the
particularly pleasant existence. It was perhaps
epitome
mildly better than the camps,
of
but
labour
certainly
value extraction.
still fairly
Labour is
fairly
only
miserable,
extracted
and
at
with
a
all manner
higher
of restrictions,
rate
forced
in
labour,
the death
and
camps
the chance
of
the
the Nazi
warm force
regime
would
that double up
wind up
as labour
back
camps
in
as
the
well,
camps
specifically
once
Auschwitz,
again.
Birkenau, where the
So,
inmates
just to
had
recap,
a
the
lifespan
original
of
picture
3
of
months,
the Gulag
and this is
archipelago
because
was
the
massively
camp has a
influential
purpose,
and
the Nazi
important,
camp has
a
the purpose
real
of
eye-opener for
systems
the
of
rest of the
labour
world
extraction,
on the nature
but
of the
also
camps.
of
Perhaps needs
factories
to
of
be
genocide
revised
as well. The
in
order
order
the
to
prisoners were
look
Jewish
at
and were earmarked for
contemporary
annihilation
research
anyway as
and
quickly as
realities
possible.
which
Meant that shifts
show
of labour
that
could be
instead
extracted
of
from
the
them.
Gulag
In the meantime, this was a good thing, but the
existing
genocidal
a
element
revolving door
was the
between
real
the
end
Gulag
game.
system and the rest of the Russian
In
Russian society
1934,
did appear
major
to be
changes
there.
happened
Anyway,
to
thanks
the
for this,
police
and I'll
state.
catch you on the next Explaining
It's
podcast.
reorganised
If you can
from
give us a review on
being
iTunes,
simply
that'd be
a
great.
political
And also
police
keep an eye
force
out for our
searching
Patreon
out
page.
class
Thanks.
enemies
All
and
the best. Bye-bye.
protecting the revolution into providing security for the state itself. This was now the institutions that controlled the Gulag system, and they were no longer there to fight for revolution, but to protect institutions that were now established. And this sees, after 1934, a significant decline in the supposed redemptive quality of the camps. Instead, the camps are simply seen as places for the destruction of enemies or the utilisation of the labour of enemies. And because it was decided after 1934 that rehabilitation was no longer possible, and that rehabilitation was no longer desirable and simply society needed to be protected from bad elements, that the bad elements, such as kulaks, when their sentences were finished, were told that they would not be allowed to go home to the communities that they had come from. Instead, that they now had to be moved to special areas, so that when they were allowed out of the gulags, being sent off to special areas meant that they existed in almost like a parallel camp system. And it's the transition between the special areas or special settlements as they're known and cities that the former inmates are allowed into. And sometimes the shift of reincarceration back into the camp system that creates this semi-permeable membrane between the camps and the wider world. It was difficult to actually step back into normal life really until the Khrushchev thaw of the 1950s. But there was a kind of a grey zone between the camps and the rest of Russian society that former inmates were able to exist in. It was not a particularly pleasant existence. It was perhaps mildly better than the camps, but certainly still fairly miserable, and one with all manner of restrictions, forced labour, and the chance, with one false word, to wind up back in the camps once again. So, just to recap, the original picture of the Gulag archipelago was massively influential and important, and a real eye-opener for the rest of the world on the nature of the camps, perhaps needs to be revised in order to look at contemporary research and realities which show that instead of the Gulag archipelago existing, a revolving door between the Gulag system and the rest of Russian society did appear to be there. Anyway, thanks for this, and I'll catch you on the next Explaining History podcast. If you can give us a review on iTunes, that'd be great, and also keep an eye out for our Patreon page. Thanks, all the best, bye-bye.